We are really happy to have Mr. Gerard Filitti, who's a representative of the Lawfare Project, with us. Thank you for coming into this Zoom meeting on very short notice because the other speaker had to cancel. So tell us about the Lawfare Project and what you're doing and what brought you into this job.
Well, the Lawfare Project, where I am senior counsel, is a nonprofit organization based in or headquartered in New York City that is set up to provide a legal think tank and pro bono representation to the Jewish community to help combat issues of anti-Semitism and discrimination, to protect and preserve the civil and human rights of the Jewish community. So we have done a lot of work both in the United States and in Europe. In Europe, some of our cases involve taking on Kuwait Airways, for example. Mm-hmm. We have other actions going as well with the Psagot labeling issues and the Kosher ritual slaughter in the Netherlands. These are all issues that we've been involved with in Europe as well. And our latest endeavor involves submitting a brief in support of the rule of law and in support of Israel with the International Criminal Court.
Mm-hmm. So I remember that case about the Aegean Airlines that they didn't want to carry Jewish passengers, was it, or Israeli passengers?
They do not. They are part of the Arab League boycott against Israel, so they refuse to fly anyone with an Israeli passport. Mm-hmm. A few years ago, for example, they had a route from New York's Kennedy Airport to London Heathrow, and they refused to carry Jewish passengers even on that route, even though it had nothing to do with going to Kuwait or Kuwaiti immigration. So we persuaded the government to help them cancel that route, because it was discriminatory against Israelis. And in the meantime, in the last few years, we've been involved in similar litigation in Germany and in Switzerland, among other places, trying to get Kuwait Airways to stop flying if it's going to discriminate against Israelis.
Yeah, but still, until now, the European states accept this discrimination.
The European states, the default position of Kuwait is that they're only enforcing their own laws. The problem is that their laws are in conflict with European laws. Mm-hmm. And until it's brought to the attention of European courts that this is unacceptable, the practice continues. So this has been an ongoing battle to educate the European courts that this practice is discriminatory, contrary to the EU's own regulations, and needs to stop.
So what got you involved in this work?
Well, our involvement in this work, we've partnered with local lawyers to file a lawsuit, basically against the Kuwaiti Airways for their refusal to, accede to European law and carry Israeli passengers. That's something that we have had recent victories on. I wish I have a colleague who's been much more involved with that, who would be able to speak more knowingly about that. And perhaps that's something that, if you have more interest on, you could take a look on our website as well to see what we've done in that regard.
Yeah. For how long time have you been working with this? How old is the organization?
The Lawfare Project is about 10 years. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary actually last month, 10-year anniversary. Unfortunately, all the activities we had planned kind of went out the window along with everything else with this pandemic, but we're still very much working and involved in cases. There's never a decrease in anti-Semitism. For example, here in the US, last week, there was a funeral in Brooklyn for a rabbi that passed away. Mm-hmm. The mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, came out very strongly against it. The entire Jewish community, basically stereotyping in a very anti-Semitic way that Jews are not, adhering to social distancing guidelines, and he threatened Jews in general with arrest. And we stepped in because this is obviously a violation of law to single out one group and discriminate against one group. You can't just enforce the laws against one group of people. You have to be equal in their application. So we filed requests under Freedom of Information Act to obtain records to basically see the extent to which the mayor is focusing police enforcement on Jewish communities instead of New York City at large.
I see. You also mentioned this case about kosher slaughtering in the Netherlands. Actually, it's in Norway, kosher slaughtering has been illegal since the early 1930s. So if you succeed in the Netherlands, maybe you should come to Norway.
Well, I think that might not be a bad idea. I'm happy to hear more information about any group that is interested in challenging that law. I think that we're making some headway in getting those rules reversed, or at least seen that they are a violation of religious freedom and religious practice. So definitely, we would be interested in seeing if we could achieve similar results in Norway.
Yeah, I mean, there are tens of thousands of animals killed by hunters in Norway every year. Where the animals die in a much more inhuman way than kosher slaughtering. As I said in the chat in Norwegian, we will also open this brief for any question from the audience. So if you have a question, you just unmute your mic, and if you have your camera on, you are free to raise any question to Gerard. Thanks again for coming in on such a short notice. I see that you have also been helpful in shutting down broadcasting for Alexa TV in the United States. Can you tell us a bit more about that case?
That's actually a case I'm not as familiar with as I should be. That is a little bit before my time at the Lawfare Project. But we are also looking at other broadcasters, especially on the internet, I think is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of stations or a lot of programming that's put up on YouTube that is really funded by the Iranian government or by Hezbollah or by anti-Israel groups, and the programming tends to be very one-sided and anti-Semitic. And Facebook, for example, and YouTube have policies where you're supposed to disclose that the ownership, or at least the control of these groups. For example, it's a paid service of the Iranian government. But rarely is that enforced by YouTube or by Facebook. So one of the things we're looking at is a broader enforcement, or pushing for legislation that would require foreign broadcasters to essentially register as foreign agents, and for that to be more equally enforced. One group that we have had a particular interest in is actually the Qatari Foundation. The government of Qatar, which sponsors Al Jazeera, also provides millions upon millions of dollars to the US each year in lobbying, in paying lobbying groups, but also in education. They've done a tremendous job infiltrating the university system, providing schools with millions and millions of dollars, not all of which is reported to the US government. And the question becomes, what happens, or how is that money used? And that money in many ways is used to influence a curriculum that is strongly biased against Israel. The type of curriculum that makes Islam look like the greatest religion in the world and completely ignores the very long history of Judaism in the Middle East and makes it look like it's an afterthought, or that Jews don't belong in Israel. So it's always a problem getting enforcement of laws that actually exist. For example, the Foreign Agent Registration Act requires foreign agents to register with the US government, and it requires them to disclose whenever they give money or donate money. It requires them to disclose that they are a foreign agent. However, these laws have not been equally enforced over the years, and a lot of groups like the Qatar Foundation or Qatar Foundation International have gotten away with influencing American schools and American politicians to a level that is basically unheard of in the amount of access that they have, but it's all undisclosed.
I think we have a question from Kim Freddy. Are you there? No, anyway, his question was, are you there? No. He's asking, can you tell us about the rise in anti-Semitism in the USA?
That is that is a very tough one. But let me start with the two thoughts on that. When I went to college, when I went to university in the 1990s, there really wasn't that much. You did not see the level of anti-Semitism on campus that you see today. We did not have Students for Justice in Palestine. We did not have the boycott and divestment movement. Sure, we had people who were anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian, but we did not have the political rhetoric escalate to the level that it does today. Today, anti-Semitism on campus is virulent. It's a virus. You have student groups that are disproportionately supported by student government to protest against Israel and to basically try to coerce other students to their points of view. And you also have faculty members who are openly hostile to Israel, even posting anti-Semitic comments on their personal websites. You find, for example, a professor at Columbia University who, a fairly prestigious university, who posts on Facebook that if you look at anything bad in the world, you'll find a Jew. That's the level of anti-Semitism on campus. And I think the first step is identifying the deep influence that schools have in creating this bias against Jews and against Israel during the education process. And then you also have more institutionalized attacks that have been on the upswing lately. For example, in December around Hanukkah, we saw a large number of attacks in New York City against Jews riding the subway or just minding their own business, an attack on a rabbi either, at his home in New York State. Part of it is the reluctance of politicians to charge these as hate crimes. In Europe, I think there's a much more well-developed sense of what a hate crime is, and you even have some countries prohibiting hate speech. In the US, we don't really have that. We have politicians who tend to be more liberal, who are more supportive of letting people say whatever they want, even if it leads to incitement of violence against a group of people, and even if it leads to more anti-Semitism. I mean, there's been a reluctance, for example, on the part of the New York City District Attorney's Office to prosecute a lot of attacks that are anti-Semitic as hate crimes. What we did as the Lawfare Project, we got involved in one of these cases in December, where this was a case for where a woman named Lichia Haron, an Israeli who is studying in the United States, she was attacked on a New York City subway. But this was recorded on video, like everything is recorded on video these days. And it was clearly vile, anti-Semitic, directed hatred at Jews. It was clearly anti-Semitism and unacceptable. Well, the police originally just wanted to charge her with a simple assault. And we had to push for the crime to be charged as what it is, a hate crime. And now that's in process of being prosecuted that way. I guess my point is that unless people speak up and assert their rights and stand up for the civil and human rights of the Jewish community, anti-Semitism just becomes kind of accepted. People don't even realize what's going on. We have a case right now at Columbia University, which has a long history of systematized anti-Semitism. It's built into the system. And over the years, Jewish students have complained about being singled out, targeted, harassed, having their education activities interfered with, and generally not being able to get the education that they expected. And the administration for years has done absolutely nothing, to the point that now when you speak with students, with Jewish students, they think it's normal. They think that being harassed is normal. They forget that this is not the way it's supposed to be. So we're complaining, we filed a complaint with the Department of Education to see if we could get some investigation going and some resolution from the university through the government. because it's not right for Jewish students to live in an atmosphere that is hostile towards them, yet they think it's normatized and normal because that they're exposed to it all the time. So anti-Semitism has crept up over the years to the point that a lot of people, even very astute Jewish students, don't really see it. They just expect it.
That was a good answer. Thank you. I have another one, if you wouldn't mind. Have you heard about the Southern Poverty Law Center? What is your opinion about them? Are they fighting for justice, or are they in the gray zone, if you could say so?
I think I would personally consider them in the gray zone. I think that they are very quick to judge people or groups based on their own standards, which may not necessarily reflect wider community standards. I think that while they have done some good in identifying anti-Semitic groups, they have also gone the other way and wrongly identified groups that have, for example, been supportive of Israel or supportive of free speech and other and other constitutional laws, which is why I have mixed views about them. Sometimes they're right on the money, but oftentimes they get it wrong. So, we're happy to see their research and we're happy to investigate further, but it's hard to take what they say as gospel without further review.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, sure, go on.
I have a follow-up. David Harwich Freedom Center. They are supportive of they have I'm not so good in English though. They have support for the Jews, but not so much for Islam. What do you think about having support from this center?
Well, we're happy to find, we're happy for any support we can get, and we assess each case on a case-by-case basis. Anytime we look at a case, we look at its merits and we look at what we can accomplish. Our goal, of course, is to preserve and protect the civil and human rights of the entire Jewish community. So if there are cases in which we could benefit, or our clients can benefit, or the Jewish community can benefit from our involvement with other groups, of course we will consider that and see how we can work together to best provide help.
Thank you.
And one example I would add, one example of groups working together involves the recent briefs that were filed with regard to the International Criminal Court. I don't know the extent to which attention has been placed on that in Norway or in other European countries, but that's been a very big deal, with a prosecutor of the ICC trying to launch an investigation into alleged war crimes committed by Israeli soldiers in the so-called occupied territories, and even declaring that the settlements themselves are war crimes. And a large number of pro-Jewish and pro-Israel organizations got together to basically see what we could do collectively to fight this assault against basically the rule of law, because the ICC has no jurisdiction over Israel. Their claim to jurisdiction is that there's this thing called a state of Palestine, which somehow magically exists, and that's what imbues them with jurisdiction and the ability to pursue charges. And we have all been arguing that that is a fallacy, that is a legal fiction. There is no state of Palestine that's capable of referring cases to the ICC. And the prosecutor is taking what is supposed to be a impartial and honest judiciary, a court, and turning it into a political body that's basically acting as an attack dog on behalf of Palestinian groups. And by the way, something that my colleagues have been very much on top of this last week, there was a report that came out that a lot of the people that the prosecutor was working with are members of Hamas, which, as we all know, is an internationally designated terrorist group. So we have the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court working with an international terrorist organization to find jurisdiction so she can go after Israelis for war crimes. And this is absolutely ridiculous. And this issue alone has galvanized a lot of different organizations to work together to try to stop.
There is a question from Ulrich in Denmark, I think. Could you say a few words on the status of the Palestinian state under international law?
Well, the first question I would ask is which Palestinian state? First of all, there is, under the definition of a state in international law has been traditionally governed by the Montevideo Convention. So that sets out the definition of a state as having four elements: a defined territory, a permanent population, a government in total control of its territory, and the capacity to engage in foreign relations. Now, the first part of that is, what is the territory? The borders are very much in dispute. They have always been in dispute. The Oslo Accords left the issue of borders for resolution in further negotiations. They didn't set the borders as the Green Line or the 1967 line or the 1947 line or the 1949 line. They set this up as an issue to be resolved in negotiation. So to begin with, there is no defined territory. You also don't have a permanent population, because if you don't have a defined territory, how can you define where the people live, whether they live in what is currently or will become Israeli territory, or will at some point perhaps become a state of Palestine? And by the way, just the notion of a state of Palestine is also not itself a given. That's something that was coined, I believe, by President Bush at one point when he was talking about a two-state solution. But the Oslo process left it open as to whether there would be one state, two states, some kind of confederation or federation. The exact aspect or the exact quality of what would emerge for the Palestinian people was left for future negotiations. Going back to the Montevideo criteria, you also need a government in control of territory. Now, even if you were to assume that Palestinian territory means the Gaza Bank, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which government do we talk about? Do we talk about Fatah, who controls, one part of the Palestinian territories, or do we talk about Hamas, an internationally recognized terrorist organization that controls the other part of the so-called Palestinian territories? You don't even have a unified government speaking for a unified people. So just by the basics of, and just the last criteria, the ability to engage in foreign relations, I think the Palestinians, when they lack all the other indicia of a state, they're not capable of engaging in foreign relations. Now, buying weapons from Iran to use against Israel, that might be an act of terrorism, but it's not an act of diplomacy. So there's no foreign relation that's going on there as well. So at this point, we argue that there is no state of Palestine. Whether there will be one in the future, that can only be determined by the Israelis sitting down at the table with the PLO to determine what shape or form a future government would take.
Thanks. Any other question? So what do you see as the biggest threat for your work, say in Europe especially?
I think the greatest threat for our work in Europe is governments that don't pay attention or care about the application of law. For as much as Americans and sometimes even Europeans criticize the European Union, there have been some very progressive laws written about hate speech and hate crime. Many countries, most countries, have adopted some form of that legislation. Yep. The problem is it's not really enforced. we often see hate attacks in France, in Spain, in Belgium, in Poland, in Hungary, even in Germany, less so in Austria these days. But we see attacks, physical attacks. We see acts of desecration of holy sites. We see a lot of hate speech. And these are all things that the government has the power to act on, but the government doesn't. And the biggest threat, I think, to our work when it comes to Europe is governments that are apathetic or don't really care to enforce the laws that exist. We've been fortunate in getting some support from governments on larger issues, such as, for example, the ICC, where both Germany and Austria filed, briefs supporting our positions and against the prosecutors. And that's terrific. It's fantastic to have that level of support. But when it comes to enforcing activities that affect daily life, I think sometimes there's been a big disconnect between what the law says and how the law is enforced. And the biggest problem that we see is that the law is not being adequately enforced to protect the Jewish populations.
Sure. Yeah, we have the same problem in Norway. In Norway, we have strong anti-terror laws against financing of terror, but every year we send tens of thousands of tens of millions US dollars to the Palestinian Authority that forward the money to terrorists sentenced in Israeli jail. And even when we point out that this is something the government of Norway does against the law of the country, there is no reaction. So it's wonderful that you keep on doing your work in face of opposition.
Well, I think it's important work to be done, and part of it is knowing what the issues are, because it's for us to, or any other group like ours, to be involved. We need to know what the problems are, and as we all know, sometimes people are reluctant to come forward and discuss the issues because they don't want to be involved or they don't want to have their name out there. But without actually knowing where the problems are, it's hard to get involved and do something meaningful. So we always encourage people to contact us. I mean, that's I can provide you with our web address after this. It's basically thelawfareproject.org. But anyone should contact groups like ours when you're seeing, the very signs of anti-Semitism that offend a common person into wanting to take action. We want to help, and sometimes we can help. We have a large network of lawyers throughout Europe who are some of the best lawyers we've worked with, who take on cases that affect the Jewish community. So I think that is something that will be very helpful, is to contact us when you see issues that require attention.
Yeah, sure. A personal question: what I gather you grew up in the U.S. Did
Yes.
you?
Or I'm from Queens.
Yep.
From Forest Hills, from the same area as our current president, but not quite as rich as his neighborhood. We went to the New Jersey suburbs. I went to university at New York University. Became interested in the Middle East at first.
Yeah.
Then went to the University of London to pursue postgraduate studies there. Did a dissertation on Iran.
So my question was, what does Israel mean to you as an American Jew?
Israel is the culmination of Zionism. It's the human rights movement of the Jewish people, and that's having a home, that's having a place that you call home and that you respect as home. That is a place where history and tradition have taken place, and every time you say a prayer, every time there is a celebration, there's always a reference to home and Israel is that home. So that's something that you hold close to your heart always.
Sure. And what do you do you see that other American Jews in the generation that is even younger than yourself, how big percentage do you think will share your idea about Israel?
I think you've asked a very interesting question and a very important question, because the American Jewish community is not uniform. There are very many different parts of it, and not just along the traditional Orthodox, conservative, Reform lines. There are some groups that have a very close affinity towards Israel. They tend to be politically more towards the right in the United States, so more Republican, and they hold very strong pro-Israeli positions. On the other hand, you have groups that are more on the left, to name one, J Street, that is much farther to the left politically, and they hold different political views. And while I'm sure that they have a love and respect for Israel, they don't see that they have much of a role in that country. And I don't want to put words in anyone's mouths, but I think that in America, there's always been this dichotomy of Jews who feel a bond with Israel and Jews who fear that if they're too connected to Israel, then they will be the subject of discrimination, because people will say, well, if you're Jewish, you can always go to Israel. And this was something that was more common, I think, in the 1940s and 50s after the State of Israel was founded. But I think that's a distinction that has to some extent continued today. So you do see a divide of groups that are highly critical of Israeli policy and politics. They're the ones who, there are actually Jewish students who stand up with Students for Justice in Palestine. There are Jewish students who support the divestment movement. There are Jewish students who feel that, Israel is an occupier or an apartheid state. And that makes me sad, because I think that they're, not understanding history, and they're not understanding what's going on. But that group does exist, and it is a sizable group. But for them, it's not, Israel is a political idea. It's not something that necessarily also pulls at their hearts.
So do you see that a big group of American Jews a bigger group will do alia in the future?
I hope so. I distinctly hope so. I think that I've seen a lot more people doing the Aliyah in the last 2 or 3 years than I have in the maybe 7 or 8 years before that.
Okay.
I don't know why, to be honest. I don't know if it's a change in politics or change in circumstances, or they just feel it's time, but a lot more Jews have done that lately. And I'm hopeful that a lot more will.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the audience? We'll give you a few more seconds. Otherwise, let me tell you that the organizer of this event is Israel for Fred, with Israel for Peace. We are an organization of more than 11,000 paying members in Norway and in Denmark. And we also have a small group in Iceland that we support, and then a website also in Icelandic. We have heard about the Lawfare Project, and had speakers about briefing us about these issues from a variety of organizations, but we have never had anyone from your organization. So it was wonderful that you could come on such a short notice, and we kept the number of participants up the whole half an hour. So that means it was interesting, and I don't see any more questions. Yeah, here we have Kim Freddy. You can do it on video, please.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
I just thought, is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is it mainly a political one, or do you think it's a religious one? What do you think?
Personally, I think that there is an element of both, but it's largely a political one. I think that everyone falls back on religion, but the technical details is where the conflict continues, is because there hasn't been a resolution of all the little minutiae that would need to be resolved in order for Palestine to, for example, become a state. Or for Israel to let go of some regulations or controls and give more self-rule to Palestinian groups. So I think it's more of a technical and political issue than a religious one. Although I think that on both sides, there are people who feel very strongly in their religious beliefs that it's hard for them to let go of a position and compromise. And I think the stronger you feel about something, whether it's on a religious basis or an intellectual basis, the harder it is to modify your position so you can reach some kind of a resolution. So to answer your question, I do see it as mostly a political issue, but religion certainly plays a role. And I think that, so many people are emotionally involved that it's hard sometimes to make progress.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope the weather in New York is good, and I hope that you will keep safe, keep distance, and wash your hands. And, please accept at least we can wave goodbye to you and give you a Zoom applause. And
it's been such a pleasure talking.
Thanks a lot for your flexibility of coming into this meeting on extreme short notice, and keep on doing your work. Greetings to the whole of your organization.
Thank you so much, and a pleasure to talk to all of you. It's been my pleasure.
Bye-bye. So the rest of the meeting will be in Norwegian.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.